This is the Business CFO for Hire podcast. Going beyond the balance sheet. I'm Stan Alhadeff. Every episode, we take the stuff most business owners avoid. Cash flow, margins, pricing, the hard financial calls, and make it make sense. No jargon, no fluff, just real talk from 3 decades in the CFO seat. Let's dig in. Today, we have with us the honor of Miss Diane Maistros from Artemai Solutions out in Maryland. Diane is a tenured lady in the nonprofit arena and has tons and tons of experience, and she's going to share some of her great accomplishments and experiences with us shortly. Diane, welcome, and maybe you can start giving a little bit about yourself so people can get to understand a little bit more.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stan. I'm Diane Maistros, the founder and principal of Artemai Solutions. I serve as a fractional COO and executive advisor for nonprofits in the behavioral health and human services field. I've spent more than 35 years in nonprofit executive leadership, primarily in behavioral health and human services. And during that time, I was fortunate to work with organizations ranging from between 3 million and 450 million in revenue. I was involved in more than 15 mergers, periods of significant growth, executive transitions, and quite a bit of organizational change. One thing I've learned over and over again is that organizations rarely struggle because people don't care. People work hard enough. More often, they simply just outgrow the way they operate. Processes may have worked years ago, but there's no longer a fit for the organization. That's really why I started Artemai Solutions. I work with nonprofits that need experienced operational leadership. They may not be ready, for another full-time executive. They may just need somebody like a fractional to come in and assist. Sometimes that means helping a board through an executive transition. It could be helping through an integration sometimes it's helping leadership teams step back and take a look at the organization and how workflows flow across the organization to build the structures that are necessary to build the organization for resilience.
Awesome, thank you. So let me ask a quick question before we even start. Are you focused on any specific nonprofits, or are you agnostic across the board?
Pretty agnostic across the board. Really, the focus, my specialty is in behavioral health and human services. I can work with other nonprofits. I think there's similarity just in general when you're working with a nonprofit who has a mission focus as opposed to maybe, stockholders or shareholders. It is very different. Nonprofits tend to work with a very thin margin, and it's just a different, I'm going to say work environment, but it's a different challenge.
Do you find when you're agnostic that in principle, it's the same stuff, the same noise, it's just different climate or conditions?
Yes, different climate and different conditions. But I think too, a lot of people that become executive directors of nonprofits or those who start a nonprofit are doing it from a place of passion. Many don't necessarily have a background in business. They have, more of a passion for what they are working towards. They may have a background in human services. They may have a background in psychology. A lot of people that end up in that executive director role may eventually get the training that they need to serve the business. But a lot of times they're starting from a place of passion and mission orientedness and not necessarily from a balance sheet.
So let me ask another question then now. What would you say is your biggest challenge when you go into organizations like that? The common denominator.
There's quite a few common denominators. I think one of the biggest challenges is going from a small organization and growing. As you start getting contracts and you're growing, everybody goes through growth spurts. And how you handle that and change your infrastructure to manage the differences that you will be managing once you're bigger. You have to plan for it. You can't treat it like a 20-person organization if you are now a 150-person organization. So what may have been a conversation at the water cooler is now more formalized because you're dealing with more people, more hands, and the structure has to be implemented that may not have been needed before. So growth definitely is a challenge for nonprofits, but there's many other challenges as well.
Yeah, I would say to you, from the corporate side of things, which, it's exactly the same thing. Just because it's a non-profit versus corporate, for-profit, it's exactly the thing. Growth has to be anticipated, it has to be budgeted for, and that's why a lot of companies falter or stutter because they do not, in my opinion, haven't planned for growth.
Right.
What worked yesterday won't work tomorrow.
Yeah. I think the other challenge that I've heard many times in the past is we're a nonprofit, not necessarily not for profit. We're nonprofit. So the thought is at the end of the year, you're supposed to have a zero balance sheet. You're supposed to have zero margin, but that doesn't equate either, right? If you want to grow your mission, you have to have monies in the coffer. You have to be building into your infrastructure. You have to have the funds there to help you with that growth. Otherwise, you're going to really stifle any ability to grow.
I think you hit the key button there. And I think the key differentiator is passion versus tenure. People with passion don't see that part of it. People with tenure have been there, done that, and understand. You cannot lose money, you cannot break even because you have to fund tomorrow.
Right. And I think that's, when you talk about growth and change and that, the growing pains, it's that moving from the thought of this is our passion and we're not here to make profit to how do we expand our mission? How do we get more out there in terms of the services that are needed for our clientele? And you can't do that if you are not building that infrastructure and working towards some type of margin above zero to ensure that you have the funds and the capital and whatever else you need to make it happen.
Sustainability is very important.
Absolutely.
Do you ever deal with, I'm sure you have, especially with your personal background, mindset, between open-minded and closed-minded? I'm sure that plays a big role more in non-profit than it does in commerce, for-profit, because, as you said, people come in and well, it's okay if we lose money or we break even.
Right.
So you also mentioned when you did your introduction that you've been through quite a substantial amount of mergers.
Yes.
It's kind of crazy. I personally have been through like 2 or 3, and I thought I was one of the big hitters. You've been through what, 15?
Yes.
Wow.
If you ask our executive director, I think he would probably even push that number up higher. But I started going through and counting them, and I thought, I'm not sure I can count more than 15. But yes,
that's crazy. What's the takeaway from going through so many mergers?
There are so many takeaways. Highlight a couple of more recent, I guess, pains associated with mergers, which is every merger, there's a lot of focus on what you can do when you're going into it. A lot of times there's one organization that may not be financially doing well, which is why they've decided that they want to step into a merger. And the other organization wants to expand its service hold. So, the benefit to both is to continue serving those clients of the organization that's having challenges financially. So there are many times that you're looking at your budget for the first year of your merger and you're trying to look at what you can cut, what you can bring together, what shared resources are going to reduce the expenses for the incoming year. And that's very much needed. But I think there's also a lot of assumptions that you're really going to meet what you're planning for in that budget year. But a lot of times that first year, there's so much work that is being done for the integration. There's work being done. You're dealing with different cultures coming together. People are very nervous. They're working with new supervisors. There's a lot of change happening in that first year. And it's quite likely that first year financially, you're not going to see what you were planning to see with whatever cuts and things that you had budgeted for. But usually by year 2, you start seeing the benefits of all that hard work that was done in that first year. So I just brought that up to point out because I think a lot of people are going in with high hopes in that first year, and there's a sense of sort of dread when you see that the financials aren't quite working the way you want to see them that first year, that there's a lot of work that goes into that first year that will likely be showing up in that second year.
I would say, from our personal experience, if a merger goes through and you're starting to see benefits in year 2, you can pat yourself on the back, because sometimes it takes even longer than that. A lot of mergers don't work because they push it too quickly.
True.
So from your experience, do you always say year 2 would be where you see the benefits, or does it stretch out a little bit longer than that?
Well, a lot of it depends on what you're doing on the front end. You mentioned stepping into a merger too quickly. Most of the mergers that I worked with, our executive director, we actually had probably about 5 months of planning. And then July 1, fiscal year for nonprofits for our arena, we would go right into onboarding all of the employees. We would do that in the months coming. So in May, we would start doing all the onboarding. A lot of decisions would be happening in very quick succession in March and April to make that work. That's a very, very tight timeline. But when you're talking about an organization that has maybe 100 employees, that's more feasible than if you're looking at an organization that you're bringing into another organization with 450 or 1,000 employees. So size in that case matters, but it also depends on the amount of upfront work that you're doing and planning. But, the standard joke that we had was every 2 years we were merging, but it would take a good 2 years for the cultures to kind of come together and settle down.
Sure, that also brings in a lot of leadership change.
Yes, a lot of leadership change, some of it through attrition, some of it through decisive restructuring. And with that leadership change comes, again, sort of that nervousness of the employees who are now reporting to somebody new. Processes are new. There's a lot of feelings of our processes were good. Why can't we continue to do what we were doing, as opposed to looking at one system that works for the entire organization? So there's a lot of challenges associated with it because you're dealing with different personalities. And with that, sometimes you see a lot of turnover from that direct line because the changes are just too stressful that they depart, and you see, sort of a changeover in people. It really depends, though. And look, cultures can be very easy to come together and they can be very difficult. We had one organization that was very small, but they were very separate, and coming together, they were very unhappy with it. We were doing another merger at the same time with a much larger organization that the staff understood that if our organization didn't come in, that people would lose services, people would lose jobs, that organization was in such a financial distress that it was viewed much differently. We were coming in as an organization that was sort of saving the day, as opposed to an organization that was just taking over and, telling people what to do.
I would say to you, from where I'm sitting and listening to you, you're talking about culture, different mindsets and culture. Would you agree with that? Or
yeah,
what's your thoughts on that?
Culture can be really defined in many different ways. In the two scenarios I was talking about, it was really, our organization was in several different counties in the state of Maryland. And, some counties have very specific cultures. And so that's where we were kind of getting a pinch back from this smaller organization that financially didn't need us. And so the other organization did financially need us. So I think that gives a little bit of a twist in terms of how receptive a group are going to be. But you also have culture in terms of types of services. So if you have a hospital system, a community system, a school system, or some other system coming together, those are also very different cultures. And those can be hard to sort of manage. And you have to be aware of, where people are coming from and, how they may have developed in that arena.
But I imagine with your experience, you also have been exposed to working with national nonprofits. I mean, I think you've said, 450 million. That's a big number for a nonprofit, right?
Yes. It's a large system that I was working in that did cross borders for sure. Yes.
It must be, and so I was thinking, also when I said culture, my mind was really going, obviously the dynamics between north and south, east to west, within counties. I get all that. But it was, I was talking more, my mind was going more towards leadership style. Smaller companies are treated, and the non-profits the same from my experience, more of a family, wherein it's more open disclosure, more transparency, versus the large organizations. They still have transparency, but it's not that easy to disseminate. So everyone is like one step removed. So when someone comes in now and is bigger, and they were people feel like they were part of the caucus per se, they're now like, one step further, and they reject. The reality is people don't like change. Very few people embrace change.
Right. And, just kind of coming off of that, sort of the family-sized organization versus the larger, there were times when, as the merger organization that was basically essentially acquiring the other, we had been referred to as the suits coming in. And where I worked, we didn't technically wear suits every day. So it was a funny sort of sidebar that we were hearing, and we thought, okay, we shouldn't try to dress up for the occasion, so to speak. We need to understand our audience and try and work with them from where they're coming from.
I hear you. So let's change subjects for a second, a little bit sideways. Lateral movement. Infrastructure. How is that adopted, pushback, accepted? There's a lot going on there, infrastructure.
A lot going on with infrastructure for sure. Yeah, I talk about one of the roles that I was in. I was chief of integrated operations, and a lot of infrastructure associated with that. And we had to take basically they were 4 different organizations, and we were sort of merging them together as one operation from the services. And I'll use our facility department as an example. The infrastructure set there, systems, trying to understand what everybody was doing in their different departments. We had 2 different work order systems. Each organization had a work order system, whether it was a formal work order system or a spreadsheet that they were using just to track work orders. And so building the infrastructure that was needed to bring all 4 together and create a cohesive department with one line functioning, we created what I called the heartbeat of the center, the work control center. And that was the one phone call from wherever you are in, the state of Maryland. You could contact the work control center, and it would automatically go into the work order system and go out to the service hubs that we had created. That's just an example of one infrastructure setup, because I was looking at it 2 different ways, right? The actual laying down the infrastructure and what the definition of infrastructure is, which isn't necessarily what most people think of as overhead. You hear infrastructure, you think of buildings, technology, you think of administrative overhead, but infrastructure is actually what allows the mission to happen consistently. So it's your operating systems, your decision-making processes, documentation, dashboards. If you have reporting structures, your policies that might need to be updated and be consistent. Any way the work is moving across the organization is part of your infrastructure.
I think a lot of people forget that. People look at it as infrastructure, as you initially said, was, utilities and rent and computers, and it's a lot more than that. The more important part is SO.
Right, right. You have a lot of times without proper infrastructure, you've got silos. If people aren't talking, if you don't have a good flow of information coming from one area to another, that is an infrastructure problem. And that a lot of times is driven by your workflows and your policies, your decision rights, and things that you should have very clearly marked. Those are things that when you're assessing your ability to be resilient, you really have to look at those things that could be making and breaking what everybody's doing, which creates a duplication of effort. You might have one department doing something on a spreadsheet and another department doing something on a spreadsheet, and it's the same information, but they're not sharing that information or there's no flow going. So that's infrastructure. It's not very well put together infrastructure, but if you work together and have systems that you can create, you identify, you need to build that infrastructure up to reduce the waste that is going back and forth.
So when you said infrastructure, obviously being in the financial world, for me, I refer to it as capacity.
Yeah.
Right? And you often hear cut headcount. We need to cut headcount.
Right.
So the question is, how do you bring the stuff together?
How do you bring the stuff together to reduce headcount?
No, I would say, if you in nonprofits, you're 99%, I would say, of nonprofits are all service-based, right? They're doing good in the world. They're trying to do something. So the better operating procedures you have, the better capacity you have, you need more headcount.
Right.
AI, who's turning the world upside down at the moment, is not going to help you give more services. It might make your back office a little bit more efficient, but in the execution, I don't believe it's going to help.
Yeah, so headcount is part of capacity, but is not necessarily capacity. So you can create capacity and find that you don't need to add headcount. You could potentially reduce headcount if you have created the systems that allow you for that capacity. I was talking a little bit about that facilities department integration and, bringing 4 facility departments from separate organizations together into a hub. We were able to do a lot of really good stuff that actually allowed us to, I want to say reduce positions, but we were able to take funds from positions that were not filled and use them for other things because we had systems put in place that saved a lot of time and effort. So when you talk about reducing waste, people duplicating effort, that could be potentially a position. It could be 5 positions. So really doing that, process workflows, identifying where the waste is, where your duplication efforts are, where people aren't talking and so things aren't moving. You might have projects that are not getting off the ground because there's no ownership rights. All of those things can slow the work down. And there's, the immediate sense is, oh, we need more people. Well, if you bring more people in, but you don't have the systems to make them work, now you're straining the system more with people that need to be trained, but you don't have the systems to really train them.
Yeah, I think you touched on a very important point there. It's the systems that work today. And people are so stuck in my world, right? People are so stuck in, but it's working. It worked yesterday, doesn't mean it doesn't work tomorrow, especially with the growing pains. I'm going to ask you one more last question, and then we're going to call it a wrap. And hopefully I don't throw you a curveball here, but I'm sure you got this one. You obviously, with your experience, has seen the shortcomings and I'm going to say the fiscal costs of people doing their own thing, the shortcuts that they perceive they're doing right or for a workaround. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've called it my sticky note rule, but if you're walking around the office and you see people with sticky notes everywhere, it might be their workarounds. And, you see some people rolling their eyes when they see the sticky notes, but the real question is, why is that needed? So it's an opportunity to ask questions and find out what the workaround is, what's not working, and have those dialogues with staff. A lot of times I think about when you implement a new system, and it's got all the bells and whistles, and you've asked for all of these things for it to do, but there's always one or two things that it doesn't do for you. The big promises from the software people, and then the implementation, and then things don't necessarily go quite as planned. A lot of times workarounds are created from that. That's just one example. They happen everywhere, but so then you end up having a spreadsheet that maybe somebody's using to track because software didn't have the field or whatever they needed to make it work. And if you're not sharing that spreadsheet with another department that may need that same information, now you might have a different workaround happening over in that field. And that can create a lot of confusion, double work, finger pointing when things don't go well. My sheet has this on it and yours doesn't. So, why did you do that? So it's an opportunity. Workarounds are an opportunity, but they're definitely a sign that things are not working the way they should be.
Diane, a quick couple of questions. Shoot them at you. Give me your ICP.
My ICP.
Ideal client profile.
Client profile. My client profile is nonprofits that are really between the 3 million to 50 million in revenue in the behavioral health and human services field, but I also work with other nonprofits.
Have you ever considered working in for-profit? You have a wealth of information.
I'm not opposed to it. I'm open to pretty much anything, but I do have the caveat of the wealth of experience that I bring is really coming from, the human services and behavioral health field. So, which could be interesting for a for-profit to get that perspective.
Who is the ideal person you'd love to touch base with in a nonprofit?
Board president or CEO, executive director, and in larger nonprofits, possibly COO.
And do you work nationally or only up north?
I work nationally, but primarily in the Mid-Atlantic region.
And how can we if anyone's interested in your services or getting to speak to you, how can we find you?
You can find me on LinkedIn, and you can also find me at artemaisolutions.com. I do have a lot of different assessment tools that are available on my website that are useful for instance, boards that might be experiencing an executive leaving, executive transition risk assessment, merger risk assessment, and have a CRO layer assessment, which is the cross-functional resilience operational assessment. So lots of tools that are free to use. So
awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you, Diane. I really appreciate your time, your knowledge, sharing it with everyone. And hopefully you can spread the good word. That's a wrap on this one. If you got value, hit follow so you don't miss the next episode. Pass it along to anyone that you may know in the nonprofit. And just listening to Diane, I can tell you now she can bring a lot of knowledge and experience, even though she doesn't want to recognize it. I do in the for-profit world. I'm Stan Alhadeff, and this has been Going Beyond the Balance Sheet. Talk soon.